evening, everybody. I think that we have given it a very academic, about 15 minutes, even more than that. We are here to commemorate and actually to celebrate the memory of brilliant scholar, professor, and colleague to some of us, former teacher, professor, to me, for instance, and I think to Dragoș, and to turn this into a very warm family reunion, so to say, to make it luminous in no way lamenting or to remember everything that was charming and exalting about the times that we spent together, and to evoke the moments and the different hypotheses in which we knew Professor Adrian Nicolescu. I was hoping that Professor Nicolescu would be able to be with us online. For technical reasons, he told me that he would not be able to. He tried, he made a few attempts, but he sent me, just in case, he sent me a text a few days ago, so I'm going to open our encounter with the thoughts that he has sent, and then I'm going to give the floor to everybody in turn. We are going to start with the evocations to have an idea of the complex personality of this wonderful man and professor. You can see a number of pictures, not as many as yesterday, for those of you who came yesterday too. Yesterday we had 100 slides. Today we are not so lucky, but I think that the ones that we do have are quite beautiful. So I'm going to read the thoughts that Professor Kitsoran has sent me. Dear colleagues, young and old, in order not to take up the time of other speakers, I confine myself to a few ideas. I only got to know Adrian closely rather late. Over time, our relationship became closer, especially during the time when we collaborated on the history of the department project. Adrian was for me, above all, the embodiment of the encyclopedic spirit, based on his native intelligence and on a solid education started in the family, continued at the schools he attended, and completed by assiduous reading. He knew everything. Sometimes he overemphasized it with humor, but also with a slight tendency to impress. Hence, the frequent quotations from multiple languages that abound in his texts. The second impressive aspect about him was his deep sense of responsibility towards his profession. To him, someone who was expected to teach English, especially at university level, had to become English. Not only to speak like an Englishman, the primary requirement, but to dress and to behave like an Englishman. And I think that he would be very happy to have Nicolescu, who is such the epitome of Englishness among us. I'm quite certain of that. I highly recommend, Professor Kitsoran says, especially to younger colleagues, the text that Adrian Nicolescu wrote about Professor Leon Levitsky and sent to me before he passed away. It's a longer text in which he pays proper homage to his professor and mentor, but which contains a lot of delightful autobiographical details. I conclude with a memorable phrase with which Adrian ends his own text and which also suits him perfectly. I quote, "All in all, Leon Levitsky and Adrian Nicolescu, my mentor, was a professor for all seasons. He was the professor. His works are carved in solid rock and will stand the test of time. Thank you." This is from Professor Kitsoran, and I would like to go on with by giving the floor to our two other guests that will complementarily give a kaleidoscopic image of this multifaceted personality. And I would like to give the floor to Professor Adrian Stefanescu, who is following in his footsteps as the director or the part of a triad of directors of the British Cultural Studies program in our faculty, who will give us an idea of what this great achievement meant for our department. Bogdan, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I will start by saying something I truly feel, although it might come as a shock. I wonder if Adrian Nicolescu truly represents the English department as it is today. I wonder, guys, if we are worthy of his character. He was a scholar and a gentleman, through and through. And I wonder today, in an age when information is instantly within reach, how many of us are a match for the reach of his incredible knowledge? And I also wonder how many of us today are a match for his dignified demeanor. He was indeed a paradigmatic English teacher. He was a walking lesson and an example of Englishness. It was all the more remarkable in those days, because that was an age of ill manners, mediocrity, and moral morass, which communism will always be. Professor Nicolescu ennobled the English department and every classroom in which he stepped with his, I think, like Professor Nicolescu, unostentatious elements, his flawless gesture, and his flawless wording, his sense of humor and decorum, his discreet generosity, and also with his equally striking English accent, the English accent of a true-born gentleman. Now, Andrei Pleshnev accurately noted at one point about living in those days in communism, in a world of crudity, of arbitrariness, of a domineering lack of culture, a conduct, a lifestyle like those of Adrian Nicolescu were no less than a form of resistance.
Because they were confronting the banality of a totalitarian evil with a refreshing banality of good. And that's Plesh's coinage.
To me, it looks like this first Romanian author of history of British civilization was also an expert in the British. And in his informal daily practice, refinement during the dictatorship of indignity, Professor Nicolescu made us all, perhaps undeserving partners, to, and this time this is my own coinage, to his samizdat of style. Those of us who don't remember what is a samizdat, samizdat is the underground culture to self-publish, self-disseminate. So it was only natural, to my mind, that he would be the first honorary director of the British Cultural Studies program, because he could single-handedly make such a program honorable indeed. He was one of the people who turned the English department into a breathable haven of dignity and free thinking. Again, he was, to me, a paradigmatic English teacher. I was never close to him. I was a student, never got close to him, probably because I was afraid of, how uncouth I was at the time, and how uncivilized and how puny education and culture might have seemed to him. But I admired him. And anyway, let me explain a bit what to be the paradigmatic English teacher meant to me. For a young boy living in a communist dictatorship, English was the language of freedom. Unlike the language of communist dogma that had infected Romanian, my native language. So I was drawn to English very early from primary school. Our English teacher, my first English teacher, my first English teacher was smart, funny, warm, uninhibited, unpretentious, playful. So we couldn't help but fall for her. And all the other English teachers I had in school shared pretty much the same style, which was uncommon in Romanian schools at the time. As I was growing up, I gradually started realizing much of this teacher profile was in fact a reflection of a lifestyle and a worldview that was made possible by English. In English. In those days, we were held captive by communism. And the difference that English made was huge and healthy. To speak English, to read English literature, to be able to escape to this other universe and live in English, even if it was only in my mind, was to find sanctuary from a world imprisoned and tortured by the wooden language and wooden thought of Marxist-Leninist dogma. And Adrian Nicolescu was one of the people who made that possible as I became a student in this faculty. It was such a huge opportunity for me to meet people like him, to listen to people like him talk in this different language, an entirely different language. And it was such an intimidating honor later on to become his colleague in the department. Now, I did mention a few things that I remember about Adrian Nicolescu, and if there's time after the
even now
presentations, I'll be happy to share. But what I simply want to end with is to say that while I wonder if we today in the English department preserve that kind of elegance of thought, of speech, of manners, interacting with each other, I hope that somehow his spirit will endure and, infect us, as it were. All in the name of what I think would be a solidarity for academic and human excellence in this department, which in a way is perhaps me echoing Edmund Burke and his reinterpretation of the notion of a social contract as a contract between those who are departed, those who are living today, and those who are still unborn, who come after us. And I hope that this will be a contract that we will honor, a contract with people like Adrian. So I'm only glad to be able to speak about him today. I'm so grateful to you for proposing that we remember him today. And we honor him just by being here, mentioning his name, remembering what he stood for. So thank you, everyone.
thoughts on Professor Nicolescu, and as I was saying yesterday when we commemorated Professor Monica Șerban, these are, well, it all started last year when we had such excruciating losses. So soon, so fast, one after the other, and I had this idea, I don't know if it was an idea, it was a need to organize these roundtables because I miss these people, and I think that many of us do, and I think we should not let them just fade away from our memory. I think that we should regularly talk about them and try to honor them, but also to, as you said, enrich our own knowledge and approach to this vocation, because it's not just a profession, in order to become worthy of such a legacy. And now I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, the director of our department, Dr. Carlos Ivana, who is also going to evoke Professor Adrian Nicolescu from the point of view of a former student and now a leader of many brilliant analysts.
Thanks very much indeed, Alina. I'm not going to commemorate Professor Adrian Nicolescu as a leader, but I'm going to honor his memory as a former MA student. So it's inevitably, it so happens inevitably that when we commemorate outstanding colleagues, we complement each other, Alina, as you said. The difference being that our experience. So I'm going to read a letter. Dear Professor, I recall the day when we first met at the British Cultural Studies Centre in 2001. You were part of the examination board, along with Professor Monica Nicolescu, Professor Madalina Nicolescu, and Nikki. The lovely Nikki you entrusted with the mission of running the centre with utmost care. There was a fierce competition, remember? Almost 4 candidates vying for a budgeted place, a written and an oral exam. I was so tense while reading a fragment from a newspaper article entitled "Tiles for Smiles," giving full information about the dinner Prince Charles was to have together with Claudia Schiffer. Once I had finished answering the board's questions, you asked me, "Have you been to England?" "No," I answered. And you carried on. "Why did you pick up this British accent?" I replied, "Here. I watch Euronews and BBC, and I used to read texts in English alone and out loud when I was a high school student in order to improve my pronunciation." Your question was a good omen, but above all made me feel immense joy because you, Professor, a true gentleman speaking impeccable British English, posed such a question. Your teaching slot, Britishness in Music, was one of my favorites. It was not only contemporary classical music composers that you elegantly and subtly discussed and played for us, but also the fundamentals of British cultural identity, a field of study in which you excelled. While an MA student, I read your history of British civilization voraciously. It gave me a mental representation of a geographical and cultural space I had long been craving to see. And it happened in 2006. But before that, your seamlessly written history, let alone your classes, had already prepared the ground for my future career. They strengthened my love of Britain and of almost everything British, as you confessed in the preface to the book, the first one of this kind ever written in Romania. Your love of Britain was deep-seated in your moral and sartorial attitude too. I admired your fine-cut suits and ties that exuded your British gentlemanliness upheld by wit in the true sense of the term and sparkling humour. I kindly ask you, dear Professor, not to be upset with me for having failed to visit you and collect the suits you wanted to offer me as a gift. I know all of them are high quality in English style. I simply refused because I was so shy to accept the offer. Although I was, to quote you, your young and slender colleague. I am still slender, but not so young, although I still have a young spirit. And it is this still young spirit that will be forever grateful to you, because you knew how to impart knowledge as a genuine university professor, unblinded by arrogance and vanity. Because you trusted me, because you showed me what erudition, excellence in research and conduct means, and ultimately because I was your former MA student, and now your younger colleague, who will unabatedly promote and teach Englishness to current and future students. With love, George.
Thank you so much, Dragos. And I think that this form that you have chosen goes so well hand in hand with this intention of keeping the memory of those who have departed as if they were here, because we can write letters to them and talk to them in our imagination. So I think that nothing would make Professor Adrian Nicolescu happier than to listen to several thoughts on British civilization, because this was his topic of, his favorite class, his favorite topic of research. He wrote books about British civilization, covering, of course, not just literature, history. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of history and music, as Dragos said, architecture, fine arts, all sorts of aspects and facets. So I have tried to invite a panel of speakers who should offer him a bouquet of symbols and insignia and samples of Britishness that he would have liked. And I would like to start with Dr. Ivana Zira, who is associate professor at the University of Bucharest and our greatest specialist and scholar and researcher in Irish literature, culture and civilization, who will be joining us online today and who is going to talk about Seamus Heaney as a poet of the Northern Ireland times of trouble. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Allow me to share my screen. I have heard it's a better idea to share it from home. So here is my PowerPoint presentation. I shall refer to the poem Away From It All, a 1984 poem by Seamus Heaney as a leading Belfast poet generation of British poets. And it comes from the volume Station Island. Now, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for this interruption. So, on the map in County Donegal, this is a place of pilgrimage, and it is identified by pilgrims, generally Catholic pilgrims, as an entrance to purgatory. Given this position and quality, we shall look at, by reading this poem, at the reconciliation of souls caught in the deadly turmoil of warfare, craving for a yet impossible peace. So what is the condition of existence under such circumstances? And finally, I want to suggest that the poem allows us to cite or to listen to a peace-willing, almost peace-winning, lilting voice. So there's a kind of oscillation that prepares thoughts of peace in wartime. I shall begin with the title, which has something strange in it. Namely, there are only two capital letter words, one at the very beginning, one at the end, both of them A words, words beginning with A, away from it all. This causes us to think that they reverberate in two basic ways. First of all, more categorically, as asserting strongly something that is in the first and the last position in the title string. And secondly, something that is more subliminally present, namely an expression of a firm goodbye, in which the decisive exit away sounds pretty much like an exitus from it all, like from the monologue of Hamlet. The poem, once it begins, strikes the first notes of an objective correlative. We are posited in a watery space, a space of confinement for lobsters in a tank. At the same time, a menacing space where the lobsters will encounter the cold steel fork prying for them. The menacing life-death liminality of the imprisonment liquid element being foregrounded as the element that the animals inhabit. Consequently, there is a lobster's life in death, death in life, in what appears as the lobster's articulated twigs. They prompt a description of its life, but as a man-captured creature, they assert a kinship with death, presented as, quote, its rainy stone, the color of sunk ammunitions. Here it goes, the first stanza. A cold steel fork pried the tank water and forked up a lobster. Articulated twigs, a rainy stone, the color of sunk munitions. Next, the reddened lobster's ambush, and I want to propose to you to pay attention to the word ambush, suggests a bloody war in little, a succès d'estime. In full view of the strand, the sea wind spitting on the big window, we plunged and reddened it, then sat for hours in conclave over the last clause. There is turmoil in nature, with the elements collaborating to the lobster feast. Then there is a self-congratulatory hour of satiation, and this makes of the lobster a perfect objective correlative for the advancement of emotion perfected by understanding in the death mind present time horizon of 1984. And I'm afraid what follows is a brief lesson about the Irish troubles, positing ourselves on the horizon of 1984, namely in the middle of the troubles decades. So there were 3 decades of uninterrupted troubles between 1969 and 1999. What did this mean? Extremely violent street riots followed by assassinations and bombings, not only in Ireland, but also abroad too, in Britain famously. Britain being perceived by the Catholic IRA or Irish Republican Army extremists as the guarantor of the post-colonial supremacy of the Protestants in Northern Ireland. So the forces aligned or facing each other in the Troubles period. In the left-hand side column, I shall enumerate them, and in the right-hand side column, I want to insist on the idea that they are older forces in confrontation in Ireland, in colonial Ireland. So first of all, the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. The IRA attacked Northern Ireland both to prove that it was not a viable state after 1921, when Northern Ireland was created as a Dominion state. And it also attacked Northern Ireland in retaliation for the injustices suffered by the Northern Ireland Northern Ireland brothers, the Northern Ireland discriminated Catholic minority. The IRA changed its name to intensify and diversify its pressure, but its most ferocious avatar was the Provisional IRA, known as the Provost, who took this name after the Catholic victims of the 1969 street fighting, accused the IRA of non-intervention and decoded its acronym from I ran away. But there is another avatar, another form of the IRA, the Irish National Liberation Army, which was banned in 1983, and we are now approaching the horizon of the year 1984. It is not that this was at all a year different from the previous ones and the following. It's just that Heaney's poem appeared in 1984 in Station Island. So the second force is the Loyalist Army of the Orange Order Lodges. They were defenders against the IRA of the monolithic, quote, Protestant or Unionist Parliament for the Protestant nation, unquote. And its avatars were the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, the Ulster Freedom Fighters, Ulster Defence Association, Ulster Defence Regiment, a proliferation of names and faces accountable to exactly the same Orange Order phalanx. As regards the first two, to prove to you that they were older forces means to look at a reality of colonial Ireland where Catholic majorities for a whole history had been both menaced by and potentially menacing for the Protestant settlers who lorded it over them. The result being underground movements organized by the Catholic majorities with often Protestant leaders, monster meetings, which means huge rallies, anti-colonial insurrections with foreign help, and very concretely, as regards the IRA, they were representatives of these Catholic majorities that remained unassimilated, as they had been for the 8 centuries of Ireland's colonial history. What were they? They were originally oath-bound secret society cells. They were committed to overthrowing colonial rule by force. Looking at the Loyalist fold now. Before 1969, in 1912 already, the Ulster Volunteer Force was set up as a secret oath-bound Orange Order terrorist army, and it rose in opposition to the Third Home Rule Bill about to grant autonomy to Ireland. The Ulster Volunteer Force threatened the British Conservatives with an insurrection, which is why, in response to this military pressure, the Third Home Rule Bill was suspended after it became an Act of Parliament in 1914. And this suggested the number of moves that led to the final liberation, and I mean independence, of Ireland and the creation first of the Irish Free State in 1922, starting from 1922, Ireland afterwards, and finally the Republic of Ireland as it is still to be met on the map today. On in the third force is the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the police, and there were also British Special Brigades or Army Brigades, which were displaced in Northern Ireland to prevent the IRA's actions. So, to reformulate things in post-colonial terms, we are talking about the First World protectors of the Second World Protestant establishment in Northern Ireland, and against any Third World Catholic movements or threats. So here we are. In what follows, I will only mention the beginning of the Troubles, but also specifying that there existed practically no decade after 1922 without attacks of the IRA on Northern Ireland to demonstrate, as already said, that it was not a functional state, that it couldn't be controlled, that it had therefore to be allowed to unite with the other 26 counties. So Northern Ireland consists of the 6 northernmost counties. So there is the border campaign with killings along the border, both sides of the border, so terrorism. And then in 1969, a massacre or an ambush of Catholics near Derry, which will be described in what follows. Then there existed a famous event called the Bloody Sunday, a horrible fame surrounding it, because it was again a case of the British Army helping disperse a peaceful demonstration of the Catholics demonstrating for civil rights, and no more than that. So this means that during the Northern Irish climate troubles, the climate was that of a civil battle camp, with attacks among Republican and Loyalist army barracks, but also with random killings and bombs. In 1969, when the Barn-Tollett Bridge massacre or ambush took place, all the formations that were mentioned on the previous slide were in place. Here are the immediate episodes, descriptions of the episodes, when the Second World Northern Irishmen, aligned with their First World British troops, tried to stop the advancing Northern Ireland Catholic Rights Association marchers, the NICRA marchers. They campaigned peacefully for human rights, in imitation to the American civil rights movement, by civil resistance to anti-Catholic discrimination in housing, employment, policing, and electoral procedures. I think only the electoral procedures are a novelty, because all the other things had been hurdles to be faced by Catholics for a whole history, not the same 800 years, because we live across early modern to modern and, well, speaking about the 20th century, postmodern times. Anyway, in 1969, and in general, in that period, during the Troubles, NICRA's campaign was seen by many unionist politicians as an Irish Republican front. Hence, the violent reaction to it. This created a pattern of violence when I changed the quotation, violent armies clashed by night, to think or commemorate of Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach and the end lines of the poem. To convince you that things got more and more serious, and that the arsenal was very sophisticated, in the battles that represented the Troubles period, here is a series of pictures that I downloaded from the internet, but of course they were suggested by the title of an Irish Queen's University academic, Eamon Hughes, who wrote this article, Cahulin and the RPG-7, the Ideology and Politics of the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association. The book is available on the stacks in the British Cultural Studies room, and it was there when Professor Nicolescu opened the door to whoever wanted to read English books in original and in very unusual copies, not because they were old, but because they were extremely recent. Initially, this British library was housed in the university, in the main university building at the former rectorate building, now the Faculty of Law. And then Professor Nicolescu was instrumental in setting up, first of all, the library and the room, which is the British Cultural Studies program room nowadays. So here is what the surprise that this title reserved to me. This is the arsenal, RPG-7, and I took from the internet to present these weapons, which are portable Soviet Union weapons shoulder-launched anti-tank, rocket-propelled grenades, used in the Vietnam War, used in the Syrian Civil War, used produced by the Russian Federation, and all sorts of technical details are available to prove to you how fearful these weapons were, how advanced at the time. Now I was told that they have already turned outdated, but I couldn't care less. My purpose is to introduce the seriousness of the troubles which turned Northern Ireland into a theater of operations, virtually, uninterruptedly. Here is also a graffiti of the masked Ulster freedom fighters with, not surprisingly, British establishment figures left and right to support and advise the masked frogmen. On this following slide, I ask a question that was suggested by T.S. Eliot's veteran poem Gerontion. After such knowledge, what forgiveness? It's my way of addressing an important question and the answer given to it that the poem proposes. So the poem advances with a postprandial wisdom that projects the lobster's fate back on a wider world horizon at twilight in the lilting movement of the dregs digesting sea that, quote, darkens and widens and darkens, falls and lifts into the conscience, questions and quotations and alibis, in the same way that, quote, oarsmen's backs and oars, unquote, have fulfilled the very Irish good luck phrase, more power to our shoulders. Possibly also an echo of Prufrock's works of days and hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. And I'm reading from the poem. It was twilight, 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 as the questions hopped and rooted. It was oarsmen's backs and oars, hauled against and lifting, and more power to us, my friend. Hard at it over the dregs, laying in earnest as the sea darkens and whitens and darkens, and quotations start to rise like rehearsed alibis. So what follows is the stereotyped text calling even poets to action. As had been the case in the revivalist figure Kathleen Ni Houlihan, the personification of Ireland in her old, wise, but still very much militarist age, who, in Yeats's play of the same title, comes to sweep away everyday life preoccupations, summoning the men of Ireland to fight against the foreign occupier of the four fields, the four Irish provinces, Ulster, Leinster, Munster, Connacht. This call is quoted as answerable by the poet's invocation, an excuse really, of seeking for a motionless point. I quote, I was stretched between contemplation of a motionless point and the command to participate actively in history. Actively? What do you mean? The glance at the loyalist arsenal and self-advertising of the previous two slides is enough to explain the baffled, almost absurd rhetorical question retort, the equivalent of the Romanian mălaș, with its deeper variant măleș. But the modern poet extricates himself from such unproductive received ideas in a savvier, subtler way, of course. He resists speaking from any fixed contemplative position that might ensnare his vigilance, for he has already identified himself with the oarsman's hold and lifts through the phrase, more power to us, my friend, and he had taken in the lilting movement of the sea that darkens but also whitens, though it again darkens, dregs with which paradigmatically rhymes on the vertical with quotations that start to rise like some overwhelming question, again as in Eliot's Prufrock. The answer, therefore, to an absurd question, how can we intervene? How can we help by becoming active in such a history that kills with power guns? So to suggest an answer is to look at the purgatory's exit towards peace. And Seamus Heaney has always been for me the peacemaking poet. I discovered him through this particular volume when I was in America in 1991, and I picked the book off a stall. And I started reading, and I was stunned by the outpouring peace coming from so many of his lines. So what I have added here is that to give himself time to digest the most absurd of questions, the one just translated into Romanian, the poet embraces the seascape as far as the horizon and encounters the light at the rim of the sea, is rendered down to a fine graduation, somewhere between balance and inanition. There is no escape from contrarieties, balance and inanition, to tamper with the water harvests, to hold or not to hold, to lift or not to lift, to fork or not to fork, even when rendered down to the fine graduation. Here the poet has inadvertently taken us one step further from the dancing twilight, twilight, twilight. In response to this invocation of the overall watery expanse, something necessary, a personal response to it all, no capital letters here, begins to form in his mind. And we understand the full power of the lobster, his objective correlatives, when his expanding, all-encompassing look takes in the implicit assent to life's mere liveliness. To focus on the lobster means to pinpoint what is preferable to death. The lobster's imprisonment in a surrogate watery habitat, that stands for all, quote, lives in their element. And I still cannot clear my head of lives in their element. On the cobbled floor of that tank, and a hampered one, out of water, fortified and bewildered. The fortified, masked, and bewildered face on the graffiti has been tamed, dismantled, and potentially discarded. Taking the cue from the lobster, the solution is to give one's allegiance to lives in their element, even though in the watery element on the cobbled floor of that tank, and to distance oneself from the hampered life in the singular, cut short by the unavoidable death, out of water, fortified and bewildered. Fortified and bewildered may be an echo of Yeats's Easter 1916, in the lines that confront the living stream, troubled by hearts with one purpose alone, enchanted to a stone. This is what the poet proposes as the exit from the hampered exitus of lives deliberately plucked from their living orbits to serve death. There is no escape from the troubles, yet no participation forbidding killing either. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like us to go on. We started with Ireland, and we won't be listening to a paper on Scotland, but we do have a Scottish wanderer in Romania who has become an adopted Romanian who came from Scotland many years ago and has become our colleague and friend. And he's going to talk to us about such intersections. Dr. James Brown, who teaches here at the University of Bucharest, will deliver a paper on Transylvanian water in Victorian England. Ion Tolbu Rabușan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Adrian, for the introduction. Can everybody hear me? When I was asked to take part in this event, I started thinking back to my own encounters with Professor Nicolescu, and in particular, to help, he gave me, starting, about 25 years ago, I think now, with my doctorate, as sort of a co-supervisor from this faculty of this department, alongside Professor Lucian Boya, who was my supervisor in the history faculty. My theme was the representation of the Romanian lands by 19th century British travellers. And it was quite natural that the two supervisors recommended that in parallel I should have a look at what was being written in the other direction. And in particular, the name of Ion Tolbu Rabușan came up. I have to confess, I didn't look for it at that time. There were too many books in English that I had to read. But later I followed up the hint and investigated. And I'd like to share with you something of what is to be found in his travel account about Britain, or in fact more particularly about London and the south of England. So, Jon Ragușanu, born, it is thought, in 1818, although there is some debate, died, it seems fairly certainly, in 1884. Most famous for this book, Peregrino Transilvan, saga epistole scrisse de țări străine lumea mică în patria, de la anul 1935 până inclusiv 1948. The Transylvanian Pilgrim, often rendered, although it seems to me that wanderer is more appropriate. He isn't a pilgrim, he's not seeking a sacred or even a culturally significant destination. Most of the time he goes where he's taken by his employers. But he's certainly a wanderer. This was first published in book form in 1865. The letters had previously been serialized in a newspaper 2 or 3 years earlier. And that takes us then back to the original letters, but they don't exist. There is no original manuscript. It's not at all clear whether these letters were actually written to a friend back home, or whether this is a sort of epistolary novel, but an epistolary novel about a real journey, or a series of real journeys. Or perhaps something of a mixture of the two. Anyway, published by the author himself in 1865, subsequent editions of the 20th century, each of them different because the 20th century editors had to struggle with his language and the spelling of Transylvanian Romanian in 1865. The original book is probably pretty much unreadable to anyone today. Under the direction of the great historian Nicolae Iorga, a new edition was brought out in 1910, that was followed up by another in the 1930s, 1950s. The most recent, I think, was 1980. I haven't seen it, apparently it suffered from communist censorship, so I'm very curious to find out what the descriptions of travels in the 1820s could possibly have had in them to cause offence in 1980. What I've worked with is the 1956 edition, which is tries to combine respecting the exact words that the author used, but updating the spelling. At a certain point, when he's offered a job that would give him an income but force him to stay in one place, he remarks in the book, my desire is to travel the world and to gather experience. And the world between London and St. Petersburg, he travelled. And what I'd like to do now is, by way of a series of quotations from his book, to look at some of the ways in which he looks at and represents the British. Or, again, I should say the Londoners and the Southern English. 1839, we get a bit of a foretaste. He starts on his travels on the continent to meet British people. He generally refers to them as Angli. Very Latin, the normal Romanian, the Nicolescu, but he sees them as the Angles of ancient times. I translated here simply as English. He remarks that while in Milan, looking for somewhere cheap to stay, he stays in the Grand Britannia Hotel, feasting and joking with some English travellers, probably the down-market English travellers. Later, 1840, at the baths in Germany, Baden-Baden, he has two encounters, at least, with English people. The second will come a little bit later. First of all, there is Mr. William Esquire, He describes him as the private secretary of a Russian envoy, and with him I have relations as amicable as could be. The English character shows in him on every occasion. For of the Germans here in their country, where he is a guest, he says only, "You are a foreigner." The Englishman thus will everywhere be at home, never a foreigner. And he is in a way right, for I do not know which state is not in debt to the English. And whoever has money has all the world as their homeland. An interesting taste of George Mike's How to Be an Alien. Mid-20th century satirical book about the English written by a Hungarian refugee who had settled and become, from Judge Mikes Judge, had become George Mike's journalist and writer of humorous books. He also remarks on the English seeing other people as foreigners, even in those people's own countries. And then, yes, also in Baden-Baden there is, which is another slide, but there's Miss Jenny, also English, of course, depending on that, always greets me with a gracious divine smile and gives me her hand chivalrously after the manner of her homeland. And I, after that of my homeland, never fail to kiss it, which obviously only in my quality of Oriental is forgiven me. At this point, he describes how he is, probably partly to impress young women, is emphasizing his Oriental character, wearing Greek costume, or Greek-Turkish costume, rather than what he would have been wearing at home in the Romanian lands. Anyway, he moves on from Baden-Baden. He ends up in 1840 in London, and starts to try to understand the English at home. He's come across the notion that the French and the English, the leading peoples of Europe, are somehow like the Greeks and the Romans of ancient times. Or is it the other way around, the Romans and the Greeks? He tries to look into this. So the French, only in their frivolous inconstancy, in their convulsive tendency towards revolution, in their luxury full of taste, and their writings full of an attractive spirit, resemble the Greeks. While their grand deeds and their influence on the general culture of the peoples makes them the true Romans of modern times. The English, on the other hand, possess to the highest degree constancy, the preponderant virtue of Rome. But their speculative spirit, their interested and egotistical tendencies, are no more than Greek attributes. So basically, comparing modern peoples to ancient peoples doesn't work. His arrival in England is interesting. He starts to make comments on what he observes. Finally, he arrived at the customs. He sailed across from France, of course, having visited France first. The objects of all the passengers flew like balls from the ship into boats, and from here were transported into the customs rooms, so that we thought we would never meet with them again. But here people are so devoted to order and practices that not a needle that you entrust to them can get lost or stolen. I wondered that no one asked us for passwords. Our man told us that such an institution is unknown in England. It is only the luxury of the continent. Alas, things seem to have turned around the other way now. He could travel all the way to France now, but he needed a passport to get into Britain. After 8 days in London, he moves on to another letter, real or not, to a real or fictional friend back home. Also commenting on the institutions and the rule of law. Without doubt, Great Britain is the most civilized state in the world. Specifically, I found out in London, you have to look for soldiers with a lighted torch in broad daylight. They are not to be seen at all. But there are in the streets plenty of so-called constables. Constabuli, he calls them. A sort of police officers, epistats, using the Greek derived word, armed only with short sticks. but full of lead, and at the end provided with the coat of arms of the kingdom. These every person seeks to obey, no matter how superior, for otherwise they get a chance to experience subjectively the specific weight of lead among metals. But yes, a land which doesn't ask for passports to enter, and which indeed was not to ask for passports for a very long time afterwards, and which has police who do not carry firearms, but they do have their weapons. Then, of course, he visits the cultural attractions of the city. Having arrived in London, the British Museum, very impressed by the Egyptian artifacts, for example. St. Paul's Cathedral, he tries to find comparisons in the style of a church service there, and probably rightly realizing that it has more similarity to that of the Lutheran Germans in Transylvania than to Orthodox worship. But he also notices some similarities to the Orthodox liturgy, observing everything that is going on. Then, perhaps more entertaining, the zoo. Although, while at St. Paul's Cathedral, he starts observing the congregation and begins to count the bald men. And finds an extraordinary proportion of the men there have no hair, which he begins to wonder if this is a general character of the English. And it doesn't seem to respect the matter of age, either, which concerns me even more. I want to leave the zoological garden where there is the menagerie of beasts from all creation that riches to all Europe. Here there are 4 elephants and 6 very beautiful giraffes. But it struck me as laughable when I was shown a buffalo as a curious beast. But more laughable it seemed to my guide when I said that my father at home had a yard full of such beasts, and that I was put up in buffalo milk. And then the Royal Polytechnic Institution, seeing displays of scientific experiments, and a place called Box Hall. The next day I investigated another place named Box Hall, where a sort of English gladiators fight with their fists, face to face, striving to strike each other in the nose of the stomach. I saw one bleeding from the nose and from the mouth like an animal, and another 2 collapsing to the ground. Then I was sickened by such a spectacle and left for the place. The English like this sort of barbarous fight and clap their hands. Indeed, they even put bets on their favourite fighters. So, civilization and barbarism somehow together in this city for him. Other attractions, the centrifugal railway, another scientific display. The tunnel under the Thames, one of the wonders of the world, which outdoes the most praised of antiquity. This is a relatively recent work by the Brunel family, father and son. And then, what foreign writer but the English can fail to mention tea? Bizarre seemed to me an English custom, which in the end I learned is something natural. On our excursions, when it got hot, Signor Sonio invited me into a cafe to cool ourselves, he said. And immediately I was served hot tea, though I was expecting, according to our customs, lemonade, orangeade, or cold sherbet. The English are practical homeopaths. They take out the nail with a nail. We are still inexpert. And while he's been round the cultural attractions, Covent Garden Theatre, he attends an opera, but I did not like the singing at all, for it scratched my ears. So many strings of monosyllabic words. It is said that the brevity of English words is adapted to nautical commands. Indeed, the English wonder that other peoples can carry out manoeuvres without the concision enjoyed only by their own language. I believe, however, that it will never be adapted to singing, as harmony calls for vowels that are sonorous and clear, not swallowed and sneezed as in their language. further first impression is the integrity of the English. He admires that more than he does their tea drinking. Not only does the Englishman have plenty of money, he's also a man of his word, and as solid as metal. He kills you with his exactness. Clothing. The originality of English costume, lifestyle, and produce is simplicity combined with solidity at every test. Thus it is said of everything that it is simple and elegant à l'anglaise, meaning to English tastes. And eating. The Englishman is the most gluttonous nation on earth. In the morning, when he gets up, he drinks tea or coffee. At 10 o'clock a.m., he eats a beef steak and drinks beer. Lunches with style at 2, repeats the tea at 5 p.m., and does not fail to have a proper supper at 9 in the evening. And then there often follows punch. I'm not just quite how he got this information, but there he is. He makes a second visit to London a couple of years later. On this one, he attends the Lord Mayor's procession in London and is very impressed by it, which gives him also the occasion to look a little bit into the system of local administration. And then he makes a visit to what he describes as the Earl of Sherborne's country house, and is very impressed by the house itself, with its vast number of rooms and suites for visitors. And also attends the English aristocratic practice of fox hunting, which he finds interesting to remark on, I think. As the Earl of Sherborne's country house, he says it has more recently been argued that he's probably got it wrong. Perhaps he was confused about all the places he'd visited, and it was actually the Bagnington, the home of the Duke and Duchess of Beaufort in Gloucestershire. But the arguments about this are not really a great concern to us, although they were put by a great English Romanianist, E.D. Tapp. And a visit to Windsor Castle, expecting only to see the outside, but as they arrive, he and his companions, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert are leaving. So not only do they see the Queen and the Prince Consort, but they actually get to go into the castle and see the rooms. And then from ancient medievalizing processions and country houses to new technology, which clearly fascinates him. From Windsor to London, the electric telegraph has been recently introduced. There are brass wires passed through posts with holes insulated with glass, placed beside the railway. He describes the railway as strada ferricata, the iron road, or metallic road. Electric telegraphy and steam locomotion are the wonders of our century. With the English, although they're not their inventors, which the English, I should say, although they're not their inventors, applied first. The English have also tried, but so far without lasting success, pneumatic locomotion, meaning propulsion through the atmosphere in cylinders emptied of air. That, I guess, was science fiction at the time, and as far as I know, still is, if he's describing what I imagine him to be describing. He moves on later to, in this last of his 3 letters, to try to describe Parliament, the system of 2 parties. He makes a contrast with the Assembly in France and a multitude of competing parties. Here, simply the 2 of them. The first is aristocratic, the second is democratic. And the question of freedom of speech. I would enter deeper into politics, although he probably doesn't have space. For here there is no censorship at all. Anyone can even caricature the Queen, who, however, is more respected than other rulers jealous of divine grace. But I've already been on rather too long. and so perhaps have I, but allow me to return to his to one of his other destinations. Between the two visits to London, he visited Thun in Switzerland. At this stage, I think in the employment as a tutor for a Russian aristocratic family who were touring Europe. But clearly he has a bit of free time to explore himself. Yesterday, he writes, I made an excursion to Greiz. I admired the picturesque waterfall of Giesbach and the romantic sights at Interlaken and Unterseen. In the evening return, I was with Miss Lucia Colbert. We sat down under the great elm on the bank of greenery. We had before us the most impressive range of the Alps, with peaks of ever crystalline ice. Suddenly, the icy giants began to light up with the fire of the setting sun, to burn with a purple flame, and to flicker in a way that captured you in extraordinary forgetting. Gradually, the sun set, the phenomenon softly disappeared. The harmony of the bells could barely be heard in the distance, and Miss Lucia intoned her favourite romance with the most delicate voice in the world. And so I said farewell to Switzerland, and I console myself that I shall meet Miss Lucia again in her homeland, and that in memory of her I shall certainly not forget the romance, which has fully reconciled me to the English language. Alas, he doesn't tell us whether he met her again. Anyway, this romance in Switzerland, perhaps romance in a double sense, reconciles him to English, fortunately. Thank you. Is there time for questions?
Yeah.
Sorry?
We still have many other, so if
Questions at the end of everything?
questions
Yeah,
at the end,
of course.
everything, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jim. I would like to give the floor now. So we have two more papers. Actually, these were meant as mini papers that would last for 10 minutes, which has not happened. So I would like to ask Monica and myself not to take too much time, because I would like us to have a few moments to reminisce about Professor Nicolescu before we part. So before we say goodbye this evening. So Monica will set one poem, and I passed our admission exam for the doctoral program on the same day as Professor Nicolescu's candidates. So we were his students, doctoral students at the same time, and Monica embarked upon the study of the medieval castle, while I turned to the musical adaptation of Shakespeare's Falstaff plays. Today, and in the meantime, she has continued her research of medieval culture, medieval literature, and medieval art. And today she's going to talk to us about the castle on the Elephant, images of castles in medieval histories. You have the floor.
Thank you for allowing me to present this short paper. And I would like to start still with the fact that I was impressed, really impressed, fascinated actually, with my first lecture, Professor Nicolescu's first lecture. One can never imagine the fascination of a student who had studied 4 years of physics. And then I arrived here, and it was the first English lecture actually, and it was like a dream come true. It was unbelievable for me. Well, I won't waste more time on this. but working with Professor Nicolescu later on for my PhD dissertation was a real pleasure. And he always pointed out details that escaped me. When he talked about the correct terminology, when we described the castles, he always insisted on using the correct word, the English term, its Romanian correspondent, and I have always been quite overwhelmed by his expectations regarding the accuracy of historic details. For instance, he talked about the date when Pope Adrian IV ruled, namely from 1154 to 1159. Why? Because he was the only Englishman to have been Pope. So I didn't know at the time. Now, as you can see, I remember. So writing about the castle was also rewarding, and from time to time I revisit certain parts of my research in order to add to this. Now, what I would like to do today is, instead of discussing on the castle and its grounds, where different buildings or forests or villages were auxiliary elements, I will treat the castle as a detail in a narrative which is about animals. So I would like to draw your attention on some illustrations that present the castles on the back of elephants, and I will discuss the source of this association. Then I will show the relevance of this detail for the present day. When I was considering what to talk about today, I realized that in the Middle Ages, the castle was physically so impressive and visible that it was an essential element in medieval mentality, always present in medieval representations, always attracting attention, even when it was just a detail in the composition. So the presence of the castle in medieval manuscripts is ubiquitous. We can find illustrations in chronicles, which is to be expected, but also in Book of Hours or Psalters. And in this case, it was usually connected with the representations of the owner's possessions. In other words, in stories that do not focus on conquest or chivalry, the castle was just an ornamental detail. That is a secondary element to embellish a certain narrative. At first glance, the stories of animals had nothing to do with castles, especially since they are not fables, and even more so when you refer to a text which originated in the first Christian century, that is Physiologus, and I will come back to this. And yet, one cannot escape the presence of the castles, and I have found 3 instances when the castle appears in bestiaries. I guess there are more. If I have more time to research, I might find others. But these are the 3 instances. The first 2 are not really relevant because they are not recurrent. And this is the first one. In the description of the dog as a loyal defender of his king, the castle appears as a symbol of kingship. And this is in one manuscript, 3244. Actually, the dog is not an animal which is found in Physiologus, which was the primary source of bestiaries. And in generally in bestiaries, there are several entries of the dog, and we don't find representations of castles. Usually we don't find, so this is an exception. But we do recognize the king's castle because of the crenellations. Right, so it is a crenellated castle. I believe this is an isolated instance because this association is not mentioned in the text proper. Moreover, in such an instance, the castle is a representation of royalty, and as such, it is just a secondary element in the description of a secondary character, as the king himself is not essential in the narrative, which is told in order to point out the loyalty of the dog, defending its owner and attacking his enemies. Another instance is the representation of the snake underneath the castle, and it is related to the fact that the snake sheds his skin and needs a narrow crevice to rub it off, and we can see the narrow crevice here. There is a castle which is placed on top of the crevice, and it surveys the entire process. Again, this is an isolated instance, as the fortification is not mentioned in the text either, but we can see the crenellation here, the crenellated part. But let's analyze the text, which is present in many bestiaries of the same family, and where we find the tower mentioned, lignis tudibus, right, a tower made of wood. And the quotation is, the Persians and Indians carried in wooden towers on their elephants' backs and fight with javelins as from a wall. So the structure mentioned in the text is a wooden tower, and it is close to the way the castles and towers were originally built of wood on a moat, that is a high place. Such a representation can be seen in a manuscript from the Bodleian Library, 764. And we can see the structure, which is secured by some sort of harness with buckles. So the people in the wooden tower have spears and bows, whereas those on the ground have axes, and we can see here the axes, right? A white one and a black one, which are probably meant for the wooden structures or the belts that connected to the elephant. Perhaps it would be more interesting to see the places where this quotation in the entire text about elephant. As one can see, it is a very small sentence here. So this is the text of the elephant, description of the elephant, and there is a very small instance, a very small sentence here, which is actually not even taken from the Physiologus, but rather from Isidor's and etymology. Actually, this original text, the Physiologus, is the text that is at the basis of the text of Bestiaries. It is a Greek text compiled in the 2nd century, probably in Alexandria, and it was translated into Latin and other languages. So it is a Latin version B of the Physiologus that circulated in the Anglo-Norman French space and was turned into illustrated bestiaries, of which the first family is called BIS, that is B from the Latin version B of Physiologus and IS from Isidor's etymologies. The quotation which is relevant to my study actually comes from Isidor's here. Whereas the text from Physiologus focuses on elephant's feature, for instance, that once fallen, it cannot rise without help. And we have here such a representation here of an elephant which fell. And the idea is that it cannot rise without help. And the text of the Physiologus mentions that several elephants found to help him and failed. And finally, it is a small elephant that succeeds in raising it. Of course, there is a spiritual significance to this, namely the other elephants were the prophets of the Old Testament, whereas the small elephant was Jesus Christ, the only one who is able to redeem the sinful fallen man. And this early bestiary hints to this aspect by having a delicate depiction of an overthrown elephant. Right. So, but still, of course, as you can see, the tower on the elephant is not missing. Right. So we definitely have this, as if you can choose whether you want the text from Physiologus or the blockbuster, you know, the castle. Well, actually, this is quite a popular edition, as there are numerous representations which move further and further away from the text. So first we have this wooden tower, but as we already see here, this is not a wooden structure. And later on, the medieval illustrator was not held back by engineering techniques or limits, as one can see in these daring stone structures, supported by unwavering elephants. The castle towers are crenellated, and one can even see a pair of lions on this manuscript. Certainly, the structure is rather peaceful, with no enemies to be seen, and it is quite robust, to say the least. So, in these instances, perhaps the best words to define the structure would be the donjon, right, on the elephant. Another interesting representation of a castle perched on top of the elephant can be seen in Cambridge Bestiary, with a figure wearing an interesting hat leading the elephant while menacing it with a sort of scourge with several lashes. I think more time is needed to identify and to discuss these two key persons, right, leading the elephants. Because there is a similar one in St. John's College manuscript bestiary. And there is a similar representation to be found in St. Petersburg bestiary, and so on and so forth. I can go on many, many instances. In most of bestiary illustrations, we have this elephant. Now, the seminal sentence found in Isidore was probably inspired by a well-known text written by King Yuba, the second of Mauritania, entitled Libica, where he describes Africa and insists on two animals, the lion and the elephant. And he mentions that the elephant can be used in warfare, but despite this impressive and frightening appearance, they were ineffective on the terrain of the battlefield and were easily scattered. And quotation. We have a coin here he minted, which bears his name, Rexuba, and of course the elephants were known by the Romans as Hannibal brought them in Italy in the 2nd century BC, before their gates. And also in the 1st century, a coin was minted by Caesar with an elephant trampling on a snake. Of course, the snake was his enemy, and the name of Caesar is quite good. I will conclude, I know that we are in a hurry, so I will conclude with perhaps the most cheerful representation of an elephant with a castle-like structure on its back, which can be found in Harley manuscript 3244, which is actually like a parade. There is no question of war or fighting or anything that people are parading. They are very happy. And it is quite interesting to follow this association of the castle on the elephant, which was so appealing as a symbol that it became the crest of the worshipful company of cutlers, the guild of the knife making and repairing blades. This may have become a guild in the 13th century, but it is present in the accounts of the city chamberlain for the first time in the 14th century, 1355. More importantly for us, in the 16th century, they were granted the crest of an elephant bearing the castle, and properties of company were listed, and the beadle's staff with a silver elephant and the castle is now on display, so it was found at the time. As this proved a relevant symbol, it was preserved and it evolved. The elephant and castle crest was probably also used by a public house on the site of an old cutler's inn in Newington, south of London. And this is maybe responsible for the naming of the area Elephant and Castle, right, which we see nowadays. So as I told you, it's very relevant for present day, right? So I will end my presentation here, as the only possible conclusion is that we are deeply indebted to our medieval civilization, and the only way we can repay our debt is to keep on researching our culture and civilization, which is what Professor Nicolescu constantly advised us to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica, for such a refreshing and elephantine paper. I am going to continue with emblematic British landmarks and symbols in Shakespeare's plays and their musical transmediations. And here you have a definition of the term. I know it's late, but please, please bear with us for a few more minutes. Shakespeare's works draw upon several icons of Britishness that travel transnationally, temporally, and across genres, as they are adapted from spoken to sung language. But if Shakespeare uses them as historical and geographical references to make the action more readily accessible to his English audience, the foreign librettists employ them imagologically, that is, as cultural stereotypes that should conjure up the essence of Britishness in the mind of the audience. This mini paper will make a cursory analysis of such national insignia. Probably the most important of these symbols are the crown and the monarchy, which London hosts as the center of the kingdom and of the empire. The two operas preserve the famous scene in which Falstaff plays the king in Henry IV, Part 1. This chair shall be my state, this dagger my scepter, and this cushion my crown. And here you have a depiction of that very famous scene. These two operas are Henri V et ses Compagnons, and by Adolphe Adam. It's a pastiche dating from 1830, and Gustav Holst's 1929 at the Boar's Head, a musical interlude in one act conceived as a medley of folk tunes. Shakespeare's plays stand out by their surprisingly scarce settings in London or references to it. The Henriade is one notable exception, in which the stage depicts sites in the English capital in many scenes. Henri V et ses Compagnons is the first opera adaptation of Shakespeare's Henry IV. It has never been printed or revived, so I have purchased the facsimile of the extant manuscript from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. It does not have a libretto proper. All the sources make reference to a play, not to an opera, written by François-Auguste Romieux and Alphonse Royer. And practically all the text adapted from Shakespeare was spoken, not sung. The impersonation of the king takes place in Act 2 in London, which is indelibly connected with the idea of government and sovereignty, of seat, of the crown, and of kingship. When Henri says he will no longer be able to avoid meeting his father, Falstaff suggests they should role play so that the prince might rehearse. Therefore, Falstaff plays the king, much as we have seen in Henry IV. In this adaptation, he uses a table as his throne, a carpet as his royal cloak, and a cushion as his crown. The rehearsal of Hal's audience to the king is also central in At the Boar's Head by Gustav Holst, written in 1925. But since Holst was an English composer who wrote his own libretto, he had the huge advantage of using Shakespeare's actual text. He therefore preserved the original props, and Mistress Quickly masqueraded as the queen. There are other references to the institution of monarchy in Royer and Romieux's Henri V et ses Compagnons. For instance, Prince Henri makes his entrance introduced by woodwinds that imitate the medieval flourish used to mark the entrance of royalty on stage, and then there is a Caledonian march that uses bagpipe sounding like music. Monarchy is also always metonymically present in the plays and musical adaptations through its residential cities and appointed officials. As residents of the British royal family, Windsor looms large in Shakespeare's plays, especially in Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2, and The Merry Wives of Windsor, and the operas they inspired. It is situated 23 miles west of London, of Charing Cross, and its famous Windsor Castle functioned as a worthy alternative to Buckingham Palace, while St. George's Chapel, containing the royal shrine of the murdered King Henry VI, became a major pilgrimage destination for Londoners in particular. The Garter Inn in Windsor is a fruitful source of zest in Verdi's Falstaff on a libretto by Arrigo Boito. This inn used to stand together with a White Hart, so since the Garter Inn is no longer extant, I have given you a picture of the White Hart. They stood almost opposite where the statue of Queen Victoria now stands on High Street, but the pubs have been demolished and replaced. The name of the inn was, of course, connected to the most noble order of the Garter, founded in 1348, which is the highest order of chivalry in England and the United Kingdom. It is dedicated to St. George, the patron saint of England. At the founding of the Order of the Garter, 26 poor knights were appointed and attached to the order and its chapel. After the knights objected to being termed poor,
King William IV redesigned them in the 19th century as the Military Knights of Windsor, which clearly demonstrates the bourgeois reinterpretation of the virtue of poverty. Shakespeare's choice of this inn, the Inn of the Garter, is doubtlessly due to the motto on the emblem of the order, "On y soit qui mal y pense." There are many variants of the legend of its origin, among which the most common is that King Edward III was dancing with the Countess of Salisbury at a court ball at Calais, when her garter fell from her leg. As the surrounding courtiers sniggered, the king picked it up and returned it to her, exclaiming, "Shame on him who should think evil of it." The Merry Wives of Windsor is also referred to as the Garter play, since Falstaff, a character forged after the historical Lollard John Oldcastle, is a knight of the Garter and thinks nothing but evil. But so do Ford and the other characters in the play. If Windsor and its Garter Inn are so present in the Merry Wives and there is Falstaff, in Ambroise Thomas' 1850 Fantaisie lyrique Le Songe d'une nuit d'été, Falstaff is the governor of the Queen's Domain at Richmond, nowadays a suburb town in southwest London. This is an astute touch, since Richmond's palace, a royal residence, was particularly associated with Elizabeth I, who spent her last days there. Act 1 takes place at the Mermaid Tavern in Richmond, on the banks of the Thames. Historically, however, it was not situated there, but in Cheapside, a street in the city of London, the financial center of the capital city, both in the Renaissance and in modern times. During the Elizabethan age, the Mermaid was located east of St. Paul's Cathedral, on the corner of Friday Street and Bread Street, as Ben Jonson also testifies in his epigram on the famous voyage. It was the nest of a serious drinking club, humorously called Fraternity of Cyrenaical Gentlemen, which included some of the leading literary figures of the age, Ben Jonson, John Donne, John Fletcher, and many others. Shakespeare is also said to have been of the party, and numerous artists depicted in imaginary scenes of the group's revelries throughout the 19th century. I'm going to skip this. The Mermaid made such an impression on the literary talents of the time as to be mentioned in a great number of works, among which the most exalting is John Keats' Lines on the Mermaid Tavern. Souls of poets dead and gone, what Elysium have ye known? Happy field or mossy cavern, choicer than the Mermaid Tavern. In it, he echoes 2 centuries later the reference to the delicious canary wine of the Mermaid made by Ben Jonson in his poem Inviting a Friend to Supper. In the French libretto written by Joseph Bernard Rosier and Adolphe de Leven for Ambroise Thomas' Le Songe d'une nuit d'été, the tavern is called La Sirène, a wily choice of venue, as it subliminally suggests both the presence of the River Thames and the thralls of sexual temptation. This opera is indeed a fantasy, since it has no connection with the Midsummer Night's Dream, but experiments with postmodernism around la lettre as it turns Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth I into characters who are, moreover, in love. No 2 personalities could be better icons of the English national identity, and that is why this opera, written by a French composer, was chosen for the inauguration of the Channel Tunnel in 1994. It turned Shakespeare and Elizabeth I into the godparents of the Channel Tunnel. London, the capital city, is surprisingly little present in Shakespeare's plays, and even less so in the operas they inspired. However, the institutions that represent it are depicted in some of them. Thus, in Thomas' opera, The cheerful party gathers at the Mermaid, La Sirène, on a stormy night following a performance at the Globe, the theatre where Shakespeare has just scored a new success. The reference is, of course, to the famous theatre in Southwark, London, built in 1599 by Shakespeare's company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and destroyed by fire in 1630. Its modern reconstruction opened in 1997 and is thriving in its artistic endeavor. In Adam's pastiche, the final scene, that of Henry's coronation, takes place in Westminster Square with a renowned Gothic abbey in the background, iconic for its long tradition of being the coronation and burial site for English and later British monarchs. The action of Hall's opera unfolds at the Boar's Head, the historical Eastship Inn, that Shakespeare chooses as headquarters for Sir John and his ribald followers in Henry IV, Part 1 and 2. Eastship is a street in central London that used to be the main market in the city in the Middle Ages. Originally, the eponymous sign depicting the Boar's Head was the center of the facade but the building was demolished in 1829 and proved to be such an institution that it was rebuilt in 1868 and great care was given to its sign. The exterior is decorated with references to the original pattern. All these imagological topoi, along with proper nouns and in certain cases the English language, refigure Britishness, national identity and statehood. London, its cityscapes, its distinctive charms, and its emblematic personalities and institutions function as ambassadors of Englishness to various cultural contexts and mentalities through the globalization triggered by the adaptation of Shakespeare's plays into another mode of expression, that of opera. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have chosen to mention at some length Royer, Henri V et ses compagnons because, as I said, I was a doctoral student of Professor Nicolescu's, and it was a very hasty thing when I decided to become a doctoral student, and I thought, well, who is musical enough to bear with me while I write an interdisciplinary work on Shakespeare and music. And of course, his name was an obvious choice. And he was extraordinary because he was so impassioned with this topic that he started digging on his own. And it is he who found this title. I didn't know anything about it. Of course, afterwards, I went to Oxford to the Bodleian and realized where I could locate it, and that was in Paris. And I went to Paris and I got what was left of the score almost unreadable. So this turned into a mission of musical archaeology, which was very fascinating, and nobody has ever written anything about this work. So I owe this to Professor Nicolescu. And I would like to give the floor to anybody here or on the screen who would like to say a few things about him. I just want to mention I was his student here in this room when he taught the civilization course. And as he walked through that door, dressed in the most exquisite suits, wearing the most beautiful ties, wearing the most distinguished perfumes, impeccable in everything, and delivering those splendid classes, he gave me a sense of normality. Something that I have to say I very seldom find. Most of the time, from morning till night, I am struck with abnormalities that violently strike at me from everywhere around. He was this kind of person that just made me feel at home, that world that should exist all around. And he kept asking, have you read Ivanhoe? Blank Faces. Have you read Robin Hood? Blank Faces. Have you read whatever? When are you going to start reading books? Yes, I remember this question. And when I look at my students today and every day, I have him in my mind. When are you going to start reading books? So he had a very sharp and biting humor. He knew how to mark, I don't know about the papers, but doctoral chapters in a very useful way, not in a destructive and, remonstrative way, but in a way that was very helpful. And I would like everybody to remember a few things. We don't have a lot of time, but we do have a bit of time to remember him as he was. Thank you. And I know that Bogdan wanted to say a few things. If you want to start, or if anybody else wants to start, please feel free. Professor Monica Botes, please.
I was going to say that I was really an excellent professor with a thorough knowledge of English history, literature, and policy. He taught clear, well-conceived, and thoroughly documented courses. He had a remarkable sense of humor, and his smile was faintly ironic. He was always elegantly and in better dressed. He was a real gentleman.
Yeah, very true.
I've noticed, I'm Adrian to attend Professor Nicolescu's digitalization courses, everybody in the first year. I could only reinforce what all of you have said. But when you proposed this roundtable and I started thinking back, and the things that come up to my mind beyond the elegance and the Britishness of his person altogether was with the warmth that he the warmth, and I think for freshmen when we were, so scared, so disoriented, and so on, he made us feel comfortable, and he made us love British history, and I think it was due to him that we started learning and about all the British kings and queens. I remember all those things from exactly that period and from his course. So I have this very and later on when I started working on Shakespeare's history plays, it was like going back to that initial course, which was
Yes, very, very good. Yes, please.
I'm very happy that I'm able to be here and I want to say goodbye, because for those of us who are also doctoral students and those of us who are far away, it's always very sad when people go and you don't get to say your goodbyes. So I'm happy that I can say my goodbye to Professor Nicolescu in a way, and remember his intellectual generosity, his patience with me as I was navigating a topic on Canadian literature and British colonialism, and the way he provided the framework by letting me find my way and saying, well, you're going to know more about this stuff than I will, but this is what you also need to know. And also his gentle and tactful way of helping me feel like I belong, especially since I came from outside the University of Bucharest environment. He was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Thank you. Bogdan?
Yeah, well, I remember the people like him, right, Adrian Nicolescu, with their English accent, were the first people I actually heard speak English live to me, with an accent that, to my ears, that was the native accent, right? I couldn't distinguish between their accent and the native English. And I was so happy with it. You can't understand how happy that made me feel living in those days, being a student in the late 80s, that was the worst of times in communist Romania, right? And I would just, you know, look at them with a big grin on my face. They must have thought I was an idiot, right? Because I was grinning all the time, looking at them, and listening to them. I couldn't speak, I couldn't do anything else. And I wonder, you know, everybody keeps talking, it's not just me, keeps talking of his elegance, his impeccable clothes, yeah? And I now remember that the first time I ever got to London, to Britain, which was a dream of mine. Didn't happen, right? Couldn't get to England before, obviously. I won a scholarship in Newcastle at the time. Was where I was supposed to go.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I bet, yeah. And of course I couldn't get there because they wouldn't give me a passport. So I was so frustrated. But the first time I got there, it was 91, I think. I walked the streets. I had a season ticket, whatever, for everything, but I couldn't. I just walked the streets, and I wanted to touch everything and see it's real. Because I've been studying English and English civilization and everything for such a long time. And it was like, you know, like being a student in divinity. I was studying something that you can't touch, ever, right? So I got there and I was so amazed by everything. At one point, I remember I saw a lot of, you know, very elegant people, but I saw this elderly gentleman. And I realize now that his style was Adrian Nicolescu style, with a typical tweed coat, right? But it was impeccable. I don't have the words to describe the feeling that you get when you see something not very spectacular. It wasn't the Armani glitzy suit or anything, right? But it was so perfectly elegant and subdued in its elegance, but so well, you know, tailored, and everything was perfect. And I just stopped. I stopped in the street and I was looking at this man passing by. Because, and now I realize that it may have been the image of Adrian Nicolescu, you know, all of a sudden coming alive again before my eyes. Yeah, and I have at least a couple of other interesting memories with him. One was, you know, 80s, right? The 80s. You remember what it meant to be living in Romania in the 80s. There was no heat, yeah, electricity cut down, always no gas in the stove to cook, yeah, huge queues for the basic foods. Okay, so there was no heating here. So we came in the winter for classes, and we were wearing our overcoats and our mittens and fur caps and everything. And we were, you know, freezing inside these classrooms. And at one point, I remember the Emeritus came to one of our classes, as himself, right? With his, remember his, I think it was hazel attaché case that he was carrying always with him. And he came in front of the classroom, put the attaché case on the desk there, opened it, and everybody was expecting perhaps some notes or a book or something like that. He took out a thermometer, put it on the desk, went to the window and looked outside for a couple of minutes, and everybody was, what the hell is happening here? And then came back, read the thermometer and said, okay, 4 degrees Celsius. That's it. Goodbye. Which was a statement in those days. It was pretty courageous to do such a thing. So that speaks about, you know, the kind of character that he was. And then I remember that I, probably because I held him to such a high esteem and I thought of him so much, we had to have these stupid political meetings every month or something like that. And they forced us to talk about the Communist Party latest documents and the latest exploits of Ceausescu, whatever. And at one point, he had to perform this horrible task. And he tried to dodge it in a certain way. And he was supposed to praise Ceausescu. And the only thing he could think of was to say, well, now we can say that nobody knows anything about Romania because, you know, Nicolae Ceausescu made Romania famous. Which was ambiguous. And he said, so now the whole world, you know, the foreigners, everybody knows it. So I think I was so upset with the situation, with the fact that he somehow got dragged into this, even in this manner, that I remember standing up, because the students were supposed to participate in the debates or the discussions. I stood up and quite insolently, I think, I said, Professor Nicolescu tells us that people abroad talk about Romania and Nicolae Ceausescu. Of course, I wouldn't know because I never got a chance to be abroad. But I'll take his word for it. And I said, right? And he kind of looked at me, smiling. I don't know if he felt insulted or anything or attacked, but I think I was upset with the whole situation, with the fact that we had to participate in this masquerade. And but still, he held no grudges whatsoever. We were in a very friendly relationship while here in the department. So I think he forgave me if anything. But yeah, he was fascinating to listen to. And I remember when we were discussing his passing on Facebook. Dana Sore mentioned something that we probably all remember, that he was a consummate speaker, a consummate public speaker. I remember his speeches. Without reading, he would make wonderful speeches, both in Romanian and English. And everybody was awed. He was a consummate orator.
I think he was the obvious choice to read the Laudatio when Prince Charles, as he was then, was made Doctor honoris causa at the University of Bucharest. It went without saying. Yeah. Would anybody else like to say a few words? Dr. Zira, Doamna Zira?
But actually, I was going to withdraw from the meeting because I'm having a party at home with lots of guests. So I thought it would end at 8 o'clock. So I'm very sorry I can't stay to speak. But of course, all I said during my speech was that the whole hoard of books available in the British Cultural Studies room is accountable to Professor Nicolescu's respect, care, and scholarly attitude toward books. So he brought these rare books to Romania and made us tune in to the world abroad. So I apologize, but really I have to withdraw, and thank you for inviting me, and have the best.
Thank you very much for having been with us, and I'm sorry that you cannot stay on, but you do know that I scheduled it on a Saturday because I thought it was going to be in between two parties.
Yes, so. But incidentally, both parties took place today, so they ruined all my. So I'm sorry for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your contribution. Goodbye. Doamna Bura? Poate a doua seară e cu noroc. Nu? Anybody else from the room? Monica?
I kind of said my fascination, absolute fascination with this lecture. The first one, I mean, I really entered a miraculous world. I was coming from a physics background, everything so calculated, everything so mathematical, and I ended up in Wonderland. Yeah. So I think it was because of him that I really loved English lecture. And the next teachers had to compete with him, which was very, very difficult.
Yes, very cool.
Well, it was a wonderful experience, and I'm really grateful because I had this chance, this wonderful chance to be his student.
Jim?
Don't think I have anything else to add.
I have to say that Jim's wife, Dr. Daniela Brown, was Professor Nicolescu's assistant for years, and many of us were Professor Nicolescu students for what we divide our classes between lectures and seminars, and we took the lectures with Professor Nicolescu and the seminars with Dana Brown, and they were very complementary, they were very suited to each other and also very different. So I think that was very beneficial to us. We enjoyed that very, very much. I think that we have said, I should say, Professor Chizoran mentioned in his opening remarks that Professor Nicolescu was a great contributor to the ongoing project of the history of the department, which will be hopefully published soon after more than 10 years, I think, but it's a start and it will be great. He has written a number of texts. He was dedicated to his history and archiving. He was both generous and sometimes he was also very critical. He had a very critical spirit, and I remember my first conference here, also in this room, this conference in 1998, when somebody sitting at this here talked about Joan of Dark for 20 minutes. Joan of Dark, Joan of Dark, Joan of Dark. And Professor Nicolescu didn't say anything, and after those 20 minutes, I thought that the faculty would crumble. Really, I mean, I was trembling because he was so, critical afterwards that I was completely scarlet. I was so afraid. But yes, he did not forgive the Joan of Dark slip of the tongue. So I think that all of these facets made him very admired, endeared, feared sometimes. So he was a spectacular human being, a teacher, professor, colleague, and I think I'm very glad that we could meet here today and remember him and record this session. And I would like to take this opportunity, because it's the second and the last roundtable for this year, that we will do this every year for another professor, Professor Leon Levitsky, Dan Ducescu, Ana Cartianu, the great names of Romanian English studies. And I would like to start an archive. So those of you who come across any pictures, anything, just send them to me at any time, it doesn't matter, yeah? So thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of the conference, enjoy tonight's dinner party, and I'll see you tomorrow or next week or next year for those of you who come from other places in Romania or abroad. Thank you. Thank you very much. See you soon.